but there were two things I'll mention about Stony Brook, one before the other. The first one being in interactions with faculty my first year about this issue of women in the department and so forth, and the second being the fact that the feminist, the sort of the revived feminist movement, I'm not talking about the voting rights, but the 1960s, 1970s, happened sort of my third year there. So, but before that, I had conversation. There were no women on the faculty. Let's start with that. Not one when I arrived. And there were like 20 faculty. I don't know, 15, 20 faculty. There wasn't a single woman on the faculty, and that was a little weird. But my class had a lot of women in it because of the change in the draft laws that year. So the graduate school exemption from the draft was lifted, and all males were put into the lottery. The result was that males stopped applying to graduate schools. They flooded the medical, dental, and religious. Those are the three: medical, dental, and seminarial, becoming a minister or whatever, priest, minister. And the males flooded those schools with applications. They didn't know what to do with it, and they did not apply in the traditional PhD areas. So for the first time, Stony Brook, like many other places, and Stony Brook was a new school, had an overwhelming number of female applicants, and they did not know what to do with this. They hadn't a clue. So my class had 9 students in it, 4 men and 5 women, and this was unheard of. I mean, the other classes previously had 1 or 2 women in them. So here we were. That was just in clinical, and I think outside of clinical, I don't really know what the ratios were, but that was in clinical. And I heard stories from the 1 or 2 women in classes ahead of us, like when they'd come for their interview, they were interviewing everybody at that time. I don't know if they still do, but she was asked all kinds of questions about whether she was planning a family and expecting to have children, and what they were looking for, of course, was she going to drop out of school, or was she going to get her degree and then never work, or because it's a professional degree. And I think it very mirrored the sort of thing that went on in medical schools at the time. Women were just grilled, and law schools, or any of the professional schools. Women were just grilled about what their future plans were, and that all became illegal a few years later. In fact, it was probably illegal then, but they weren't enforcing that. That's Title IX stuff. So it probably was already illegal, but it wasn't in force, that you couldn't do that. So they were interviewing, asking every woman who came in, faculty or a graduate student applicant, what their future plans were. And if they said, well, I plan to marry and have 4 children, they were going to say, well, that's nice, have a nice life, bye. Okay, and they would actually try to infer this, and there was some stress interviewing going, well, you're married and you want to go to graduate school. How are you going to balance that? What are your, how do you plan? All right. So there was a lot of that, and we heard it from the more advanced students. I can't say I ever experienced that, probably because that year they were overwhelmed with female applicants. Or possibly because, I had a very strong record, and they clearly wanted me to come, and they probably knew that these kinds of questions were not going to be welcome. So whatever reason, I didn't experience that. But the first year I was driving with some of my classmates and a course instructor to do an assessment practicum at a local hospital. We were testing kids, and this man, who I will not name, I think he's still on faculty, I think he's retired actually, went off on a big thing about admission strategies and how this class had been composed. And he said, well, you all really deserve to be here, the women and the men, and, even though there are more women in this class than men, that's just because of, reflects the ratio of applications. But we were extremely hard on the female applicants, they had to be much better than the male applicants before we'd admit them, because we know that life is much harder for women in the professions. They have 2 roles that they have to balance, and it's very hard for them, and therefore we know they have to be much more motivated and much smarter and have much higher grades in order to pull it off. It's easier for men. They have a wife at home to support them. Women are never going to have that kind of support. So he thought he was making, from his view, I think, a feminist statement. I don't know what he thought. He didn't think there was anything bad about what he was saying. And, in the car, we were all sitting there. don't think there were any men in the car with us in our class. We were just, 3 women and this instructor. And we were all sitting there with our jaws dropping, and he's rattling on about, this is the admissions thing and how we have to cope with this fact that we have this overwhelming number of women applying because of the draft laws. And we were just shocked. I mean, it had never occurred to any of us that we'd had to meet a higher bar than the men did to get admitted. And he was just totally open about it. Didn't see anything wrong with that. As I said, it was already illegal, but it wasn't being enforced.
Yeah.
There was not much awareness. So that was the first thing that sort of went, oh my God. I certainly had never experienced anything like that at Reed. It just wouldn't have been conceivable that somebody would have. And then it kind of all came out maybe 1970. I think they started to organize. The women's movement began. There were consciousness-raising groups on campus, and some of my friends were involved in that. I got involved through friends, and it was really very important to me. We had these weekly meetings for a while with people from all different departments. I got to meet women in the biochemistry department, the physics department, and it was great. Some of them are still friends. So we all gave each other a lot of support, and I think our respective spouses, boyfriends, etc., many of us were quite threatened by this activity, because once a week they were, we'd go out to some meeting that they weren't invited to, or it might be, God forbid, in our house, and they have to clear out, and you got to go out tonight, the consciousness raising group is coming. And go, what is this? Go bowling, dear. Go play poker. Yeah. So that was really quite a supportive and eye-opening thing, and it was in that context that I decided to work in this field, because I was working on a very conventional sort of a problem in terms of sort of motivational developmental theory and reward systems with kids. I was working with Howie Racklin, who's quite a prominent person in this area of sort of human motivation, economics, and then a developmental perspective on that. And I was working with him, and it was interesting stuff. But I was in a school, nursery school, waiting for kids to be free from whatever activity they were, so I could do some testing with this paradigm on, motivational stuff. And it was all very esoteric, kind of mathematical, but you could do it with little kids. And we used a pinball machine, but the number of balls, of course, had to do with the reinforcements and future versus present versus, the kids loved it. I had no ethical qualms about doing this. Kids had a blast on this paradigm. So this was no hardship. But I'm waiting for the kids to be free from some group activity so that they're going into free play, so that the teachers don't mind them being hauled out for 15 minutes for a paradigm. And I'm watching, and they're in the classroom. I told this story. I did the keynote for the Gender Development Conference last year, which was really quite a treat to be asked to do that, the one in San Francisco in April. And I told this story, and it got quite a response to the audience. I'm watching the kids while we're waiting, and it's Easter time, and the teacher's playing the piano, and other teachers, the whole, there's like 40 kids in the room. And because there were 40 kids in the room and they didn't want to riot, they divided the group in half so that one group could get up and dance while the other group sat and watched. And of course, gender is the way they would divide a group. Every kid knows what sex they are, so it's easy to get half of them up and half of them sitting. So they had first, the boys went first, and the teacher played Here Comes Peter Cottontail, and they were supposed to hop, and they did, and they were hopping around the room, and they had a great old time, and then they finished and they sat down, and then it was the girls' turn to get up, and the teacher starts to play In Your Easter Bonnet, the Easter parade song. Yeah. And they were supposed to have an Easter parade, and their hats and their white gloves, and so they got up there, and they're skipping along, in my Easter bonnet, and they were all real happy. The teacher stops them, says, "Ladies, is that the way we have an Easter parade? You're supposed to be ladylike, and it's really supposed to be elegant, and you're not supposed to make huge amounts of noise tromping with your feet. They're skipping, and it was very noisy, I have to say. It always is. 20 little girls dancing around the room on a wooden floor, that's going to be noisy. So they all went, oh, okay. So she starts again and goes through the whole song again, and this time they're tiptoeing around, pretending they're at a tea party or something. So this ends, and the girls sit down, and a little boy raises his hand, and he goes, "Teacher, it isn't fair." The teacher goes, "What isn't fair?" He said, "The girls got to go twice." She goes, "Okay, it wasn't fair. You guys get to go twice, too." So the boys get up, and sure enough, she plays Here Comes Peter Cottontail again, and they hop around the room, making a perfect riot and having a blast. And then they sit down, and that's kind of the end of the incident. And I just went home, and I was knocked out by this. I said, what the hell are they teaching these kids? You know, it's really extraordinary. And nobody even commented on it or protested or anything. It's just the way it was, and the teachers were clearly doing what they considered was their job. And it turns out nursery school curriculum, preschool now, or daycare, is a real hotbed of gender socialization. And, you know, so I discovered that. I just thought about that incident for weeks afterwards, you know, while I was collecting my data on pinball machines. And I said, you know, I think this is more exciting than pinball machines. Something's going on here.